Jason, thanks for joining us. You know, your research is typically related to hazard disclosure in real estate markets. You work with insurance companies, banks, that sort of thing. What made you and this group of authors decide to delve into this issue of flooding on reserves when you did this, like last spring, I guess is when it came out?
Right. Well, we know that in Canada there's a significant history of flood risk on Indigenous reserve lands in Canada. And we hadn't found much information to date that actually tried to map and measure just what this exposure is relative to the rest of Canada. Given the exposure of Indigenous communities to this important hazard and the fact that it's going to be increasing in the future as a consequence of climate change, we felt it was important to try and address the gap.
You know, and this project had pulled together sort of a big patchwork of research that had been done on First Nations flooding. What is the picture that we see when you pulled all of that research together?
Yeah, it was some detective work to try and pull together some different data sets and sort of the existing research. But once we pulled it together and figured out some trends, we confirmed that Indigenous communities are disproportionately exposed to flooding in Canada, with almost 22% of residential properties in these communities at risk of the 1 in 100-year flood. So this is higher than other communities in Canada, revealing some of the impacts of colonization and settler-based flood risk management policy. So, you know, we do have a bit of a crisis here on some of these communities when it comes to their exposure to flood risk.
More on some of the numbers that were in your report. Between 2006 and 16, for instance, nearly 70 Indigenous communities across Canada experienced flooding, and a quarter of them had experienced multiple floods, which of course we know to be true. We're covering, you know, Saskatchewan all the time, that sort of thing. Lots of the communities in the Interlake here in Manitoba, repeated flooding. You know, is the reason for it, does it vary based on community to community or region to region, or is there like, what did you guys find in terms of why some of these communities are particularly always at risk? Were they relocated, that sort of thing?
In general, Canada, flooding is our most common and costly hazard. So we build oftentimes our communities along waterways, via coastlines or riverways. So there is variability across Canada, but flood risk is always present. So certainly we do see some evidence that Indigenous peoples reflect the broader injustice we see around climate change, where those least responsible for causing the problem are suffering disproportionately from its effects. So I think that was an important conclusion from us, and it shows that we need to do a lot more work to better understand the sources of the problem.
So, and I guess, what is the work that has to happen? You know, where do you go from this report? What's the government's involvement in this? Presumably they've seen this report. How's that been accepted by them?
Right. Well, the report raises a lot more questions that we don't have answers to. So we need to start tackling some of that. One of them is we just need better information on flood risk and exposure among Indigenous communities. So I can give you an example. You know, we basically took the information that we could find that was publicly available: location of roads, location of existing properties. Well, that doesn't include things like culturally significant land, infrastructure, and there was a lot of patchy data there. So I think a first step is to sort of address some of those gaps and get a better picture of just where the risk is. Once we know where the risk is, we can start to prioritize resources to be able to manage it. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, how do we get a better idea of where the risk is? Well, once we have some of this information, we have to go and find better ways of engaging with these communities. I think we need to affirm and listen to Indigenous communities who have tended to and taken care of flood risk for generations. There are many different ways that these communities have been adapting their own flood risk management by actively learning and collaborating with the land around them. So it's important to get a better understanding, too, of the leadership that already exists and learn from that.
I know certainly in Manitoba there's a court case going on here of communities in the Interlake that had been flooded because of man-made changes to the water systems in and around their communities, and now they're flooded all the time. And now the government is saying we've got a fix. The provincial government, that is, saying, oh, we have a fix to this. We're going to do X, Y, Y, and Z, and the First Nations are saying, no, stop making decisions without having any conversations with us. So that speaks to exactly what the point you just made. In terms of the federal government, do you get a sense that there is an appetite to be looking at these things and working towards solutions?
Yeah, to the federal government's credit, they have, over the last few years, significantly increased the budget towards flood issues. And there is a focus, in particular, on Indigenous communities. Whether they have the capacity and leadership to be able to carry through on that promise, though, remains to be seen. So there are some promising developments, certainly, but, we're really not even at the end of the beginning of this. We need to do much more work to better understand how we're going to be able to address the problem.
Well, thank you for your work, Jason, that you guys did on this. Look forward to seeing what else you guys come up with. As you said, this is kind of the beginning. There's a lot more left to do. So check back in with us and let us know how it's going, because it's something that affects a lot of our communities. So worth talking about for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, grateful for the opportunity and appreciate you reaching out to us.